Hello, my name is Tristan Roberts with the Quilnook Experience podcast, and I'm joined today by Shaun Chamberlin. And Shaun, I just love you in your own words to say, who are you and where are we connecting?
Yeah, well, this is always a problem for me because I'm involved with so many things and have been involved with so many things that I'm never quite sure which angle to come from. I mean, my work broadly goes under this umbrella of dark optimism. That's the name of my website and kind of, the kind of umbrella. Underneath that, I was involved in kicking off the Transition Towns movement, the early days of Extinction Rebellion, a lot of direct action type stuff. I used to chair a thing called the Ecological Land Cooperative, probably best known now for bringing my late mentor David Fleming's work to the world in the form of these books, Lean Logic and Surviving the Future, and then helping produce a film about his work called The Sequel, What Will Follow Our Troubled Civilization. And I live a place called the Happy Pig in Ireland, which is a small community around a free pub, a free inn where people can come and stay for free and exist outside the moneyed economy for a while. And I also teach through Stirling College these courses called Surviving the Future, Conversations for Our Time. I think those are probably the main things you might be interested in.
Thanks,
You tell me.
I will. Well, for a little context, I'm based here in Vermont. You mentioned Stirling College, which I assume there must be a Stirling College somewhere in England. It just seems like a English type of name, but you're actually talking about the Vermont one, which is...
I am talking about the Vermont one, yeah. Stirling, to an English ear, Stirling sounds very Scottish, actually.
Okay.
So lots of my friends assume I'm teaching in Scotland.
Shaun, I think I was aware of your work for a long time. The Transition Town movement got a lot of attention here over the last couple decades, and there have been local movements around that, which I have not been involved with. So I'll say I don't really have much firsthand knowledge of it. What drew me to your work and talking further was that you gave a guest lecture as part of a course that I was also guest lecturing in and doing some mentoring in. And your talk I found myself just nodding so much and being like, wow, he's not only saying what I think, I feel like he's a couple steps ahead of where I've even gotten to. As hard as I've worked to gain the insights I've had, I felt like you have them all and then you're another 2 steps ahead. And I wish I took better notes, but I was almost just like trying to let it absorb into my limbic system on a non-linguist basis, and thought, I'm just going to follow up with Shaun and start to incorporate more of your thinking, because I think it's really valuable. So I guess what I want to say is, did you know you had that effect on people of just kind of calming them and with your ideas?
Calming them. Yeah, I mean, hopefully calming and exciting all at the same time. But yeah, I mean, this is sort of the essence of how the Stirling College collaboration came about. And, what I do there is essentially hold spaces for people, exploring the state of the world today and what we might do about it, really. And for me, it's great because, I get to be around a bunch of other people who are also similarly excited about the same things and trying to figure out the same things and exploring the same things. And so, it really seems to work. Like, I do seem to have the right vibe about me to hold those kind of spaces, but also the right vibe about me to really enjoy those kind of spaces. So I was delighted when you reached out and offered, another avenue for the kind of conversations I love having. One of my favorite lines from David Fleming's work actually is, "Do nothing that matters without consulting a conversation." And so, in many ways, that's been quite an inspiration for my work since he died, is to just create the frameworks and the spaces where the conversations that aren't getting prioritized in the mainstream can actually happen.
So there's a lot I want to circle back on. I think it would just make the most sense to ask you, what is dark optimism? What does that mean?
Well, I guess it fundamentally means bright, shiny optimism just winds me up, frankly, because, everything isn't fine. Like, get with the program. There's some serious problems going on. And so, I'm not that interested in conversations that don't acknowledge the darkness of our times, for want of a better word. At the same time, once we actually do recognize the reality that we're facing, there's absolutely nothing about these times that stops us from telling stories with our lives that we're proud to tell. And, what more can we ask of life? And so I guess dark optimism is that. It's kind of looking forward with a very proactive, collective kind of lens, but without ignoring the way I sometimes summarize it as being unashamedly positive about the kind of future we could create and unashamedly realistic about how far we are from doing that right now. I think that's dark optimism in a nutshell.
I think that's remarkable. And I feel it's remarkably rare because I think if we look at, and I could maybe think of a Venn diagram here of sort of people that are aware, truly aware of the challenges we face as a species, as a planet, and so on, that there's a lot of overlap between people that are willing to look at that fully and people that are completely panicked. And
yeah,
while we may have optimism in sort of a general way, we can all imagine, we all have, well, let's just say we all have bright spots in our lives, or I hope we do. We all have a park we like to go to, person we like to have conversation with, a happy place in the world that we visited. And I think we can all maybe imagine more of that in the future, a happy future where there's more things like that and more people have access to things like that. But to feel it's really possible, or to feel even optimistic that that is innate to humanity and we could all find that feels rare in the sense of people who are as tuned in, as I mentioned, and as I said, often panicked. Where do you come by that?
Well, I'd be wary of saying that we can all find that. Like, I'm always wary of trying. I don't want to say, in the ways it's conventionally measured, that the future can be, bright and wonderful for everybody, because I think there are very real consequences of things that are already unfolding that mean that's not going to be the case. But I do want to say that we can make the future better than it would otherwise be. The way things are going can be improved. And working to make things better than they would otherwise be is meaningful work and is satisfying and actually brings us a joy and a meaning in life. So I'm always very wary to not give the impression that I'm saying, everything could be sunshine and roses for everyone, because I don't think that's the case. And with your kind of Venn diagram, you're right. Like, there's this huge overlap with panic and kind of shutdown. And I think there's also a huge overlap with this kind of doomer superiority thing of like, oh, well, I realize how awful everything is far more than you do. And, I'm just going to, whatever you say, I'm going to say, but you haven't taken this into account. It's even worse than that. But you haven't taken this into account. It's even worse than that. And, I understand the temptation to that, especially when you're dealing with people who don't acknowledge the dark. It's kind of, it can be frustrating. But at the same time, there's a line by the late Raymond Williams who said, to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. And I think that's right. I don't think there's any shortage of grounds for despair. And as Wendell Berry says, if you want to argue for despair, well, sure, you'll win the argument. There's plenty of reasons to show that lots of the things that we might hope for our future are doors that have closed now. And I think until we accept that and actually grieve that, then we're having quite a superficial conversation. We're just, wouldn't it be wonderful if? Well, sure, but it's not going to happen, right? And so that's where the dark in the dark optimism comes in, is, well, actually, no, there's lots of things that I would die to change if I could, and I can't. And, species are going extinct, and our climate is destabilizing, and all manner of things are, in my opinion, now certainly beyond my control and beyond human control, likely, collectively. And so really then the question is, well, where does that leave us? Doesn't that just leave us in despair? And no, I don't think so. Because, read Viktor Frankl's famous book about literally finding meaning whilst living in a Nazi concentration camp. If he can do that, what right, really, do we have to go, oh God, everything's so awful, I'm just going to despair and give up hope, it's just not appropriate when it comes down to it, and it's not fun, and it's not joyous, and it's not stimulating, and it doesn't make us feel good about our lives. And so really that's dark optimism, is how do we find the meaning and the purpose and the joy in life without denying how bad everything is, which it is. and I think part of the reason that the courses have found a kind of niche. I was also involved with the origins of the Dark Mountain movement, which is a similar kind of space for exploring kind of Yeah, exploring what kind of conversations we can have after we acknowledge what we all secretly believe is true, like how completely screwed everything is. And you constantly, certainly in environmentalist circles, you constantly get told, no, we must stay hopeful. If nothing else, we must stay hopeful. And you're like, it's exhausting, actually. It's exhausting to pretend that you don't know the things that you know or believe the things that you believe. And so it can be a real relief to step into a space where that stuff is acknowledged. But the difficulty in that often in our peer groups and our families and our communities is that we want to have the conversation about kind of dark optimism, like given the dark, what do we do? But if the people we're talking to don't know the dark, then you end up just talking about that all the time. You know, you end up saying, well, you know how this is happening and it's terrible. What are we going to do about it? They're like, no, what? What are you talking about? Oh, okay, let me tell you about that. And then suddenly you're just the doom guy, right? You're just the guy who's always telling everyone how messed up everything is. And you never get to have the conversation you actually want to have, which is everything's messed up and what are we going to do about it? And that's really the spaces I want to hold, is spaces for people where we all already know the context, and then we can actually get to the really juicy conversation, which is how do we make it better? Not fix it, not solve it, because we're facing predicaments, not problems, but make it better than it would otherwise be.
But first there's that, and thank you for saying everything you said, and I think first there's that step into the dark space, and I've noticed, I think that's a very difficult step for people to take. I think about it a lot in terms of childhood. I believe that a lot of, maybe all of our problems as a species kind of come back to bad parenting. And as a kind of Western culture, we're horrible at parenting and being in touch with our emotions overall. And even as I say that, I have in my mind a lot of people I know, a lot of friends would say, yeah, but my childhood was pretty good, or, my parents really love me. How can you say that it all comes down to that? And I have conversations with people where they say, yeah, my father was an alcoholic, but, I know he really tried hard and loved me and everything's fine. And I think there's a lot of potential for grief in moments like that, of just stepping into and saying, yeah, I know my parents love me, or, yeah, I know I love my planet Earth, but I also can acknowledge that things are hard. I can also acknowledge I feel very scared for my future. I can also acknowledge there's some things I haven't been able to get in my life that were important to me. And I think it's that first step that starts to open up the grieving process. And I want to ask you how you go there, or how you help people go there in a way that's safe and gives a sense of a journey. Well, I'm not just going to be grieving in the darkness forever. I can move to some sense of real conversation with the world and real sense of comfort.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned grief. I think grief is core here. And I think it's really important to say that grief is not the same thing as loss. I think a lot of our culture says grief and loss are things to be avoided where possible because they're painful and they're difficult and bad. And yeah, we need to make this distinction, like loss is painful and difficult and awful. Grief, I think, is the process of healing from loss. Grief is the process we go through that brings us back. So 12 years ago now, David Fleming, who I mentioned, my late mentor, passed away very suddenly. And he was the guy who was kind of helping me learn how to build a life around the kind of work I was fascinated in, which I didn't have any real peer group around, and there wasn't much talk about at the time. And that hit me really hard. And then 3 weeks later, my fiance died equally suddenly and unexpectedly. And so my kind of personal life and my work life, if you like, both kind of shattered in the space of 3 weeks. And I don't know, a lot of the advice we're given is you got to keep it together, man. And I think that's really bad advice. Unfortunately, those blows hit me hard enough that I wouldn't have been able to take that advice if I'd wanted to. So I just, shattered, and I learned a lot of involuntary lessons about grief. And the way that I see it is that when something hurts too much, we shut down, and that's healthy. If it's too much to process, you have to, as a self-preservation measure, and we do the same when we're in intense physical pain, when we're in intense emotional pain. And then grief is the process of, over time, going to all those doors inside yourself that you slammed shut and opening them. And behind each one of them is this wall of pain, because that's why you shut it in the first place. But also behind each one of them is part of yourself, the part that's in that intense pain. And so for me, the process of grieving was opening those doors in my own time when I was ready over the course of years, feeling that pain and in living it, moving through it and beyond it to what's beyond grief, which I would say is joy, actually. It's being fully alive. Shutting those doors was making myself less alive because I couldn't cope with how much life hurt. Opening those doors was the process of coming back to life through moving beyond that pain, moving through and beyond that pain. And yeah, like grief, it can deepen you and bring you more to life and bring you into a kind of dark optimism, a kind of like, their deaths is one of those things that if I could do anything to change it, I would. But I can't. And ultimately, with predicaments, things that aren't changeable, but you have to come to terms with, that's what you have to do. You have to accept, actually, I can't make David alive again. I can't make Mario alive again. But maybe what I can do in this particular case, my best friend said something really powerful to me that changed my life, which was the best thing you can do for people you love after they die is keep what was best in them alive in the world through your own life. And in the case of David, it was really, really clear to me that after he died, so he never got Lean Logic published in his lifetime. It was his life's work. And I found the manuscript after he died and read it through and was like, well, this is what I need to do to honor him is bring this to the world, and the world needs it too. So that was clearly my work for the next couple of years at a time when I frankly didn't really care about anything else, because most of me was shut down. And I think, that the experience of the time between their deaths and kind of finding that meaningful way forward, it's what I call the space between stories. I had this story of how my future was going to be with them both, and then that story ended bluntly and abruptly. And I didn't have anything else, so I was just in this agonized limbo of pain. And then I found something worth living for again, rather than taking the course that was certainly tempting of just shutting myself down and, distracting myself, whether by drink or by work I didn't believe in or, whatever. There's a million ways you can not look at grief. And what I think is happening, and as a writer, when I was going through that, I was sometimes writing about this kind of grieving process. And what became really apparent to me from the responses I was getting was, oh, wow, this is really the process people are going through with regard to our society right now. Like, the story they told themselves of their place and their future is just getting shut down brutally and abruptly. And they're in that space between stories. And it's awful. And, you asked in your question, how do I create a safe space for people to do that? And my answer is I don't. Like, there is nothing safe about the space between stories. It is painful and it's awful. But what I can do is share my story and say, I've been in a space that maybe you recognize. And I can say that I came out the other side to something that feels joyous and real and meaningful and means something even in the light of all of that, without denying that agony, but respecting it and honoring it and doing something with regard to it. And so it's less creating a safe space, more just saying, I'm here, I've been somewhere similar, I'm happy to take your hand. I don't guarantee where this goes, but in my experience, facing it goes somewhere meaningful, and hiding from it just means hiding from ourselves, hiding from being fully alive. And very few people actually want that.
Shaun, thanks for sharing this part of your story. I don't want to say I'm sorry for your losses, but I see you. I see that, and I acknowledge it, and I appreciate you sharing your story.
It feels like something that will be endlessly difficult as long as I'm not numb to it, but that is where it should be. Feels somehow right. And I think there's this distinction, I was talking to my best friend about this, that there's this distinction for me between like clean pain and, I don't know, twisted pain. Like, sometimes something is just so utterly wrong. Like maybe you've done something awful and the guilt in you is just twisting your guts and just despicable, and everything about it is wrong and awful and it taints your entire life. And then there's kind of clean pain, which is like, my God, it hurts that she's not here. But at the same time, that's somehow pure. And yeah, I can take clean pain.
Well, again, thank you for sharing it. And I just want to say, I feel like it's a lot to ask of you. We've barely just met to talk about such a thing publicly. And I want to give a little context where I think not only is what you're sharing beautiful in terms of who you are and your relationship, I also think it's useful. I have a son, and sometimes you imagine all the worst things that could happen. And it's actually an impediment to having children. Well, why would I want to have children if terrible things could happen? Why would I want to have children if the planet is going to end, they're going to have a horrible life? Why would I want to fall in love and I think it's quite useful and beautiful to hear a story like yours that helps us continue to stay present in the world and stay present with the true potential of all our relationships.
Better to have loved and lost without a question than never to have loved at all. Without a question.
And I fully agree with your view that kind of relationships extend through time and space. I don't know that I capital B believe in sort of reincarnation or multiple lifetimes of. I mean, there's certain beliefs around you have multiple lifetimes and your soul kind of takes different configurations with other key souls you're kind of traveling with. And I don't know if I believe in any of that with like a capital B, but I find it very useful to think about, because when I am estranged from someone in my life, or I'm having a very difficult challenge with someone in my life, or I miss someone dearly that is departed, to kind of just be at peace with it. Okay, this is how it is right now. And it could be this way for the entire rest of my lifetime. This relationship could be as difficult as it is now. And that is what it is. And maybe there's some other future or there's some other past where things were different, where we explore what can be in a different way. And that will be what that is then, but it isn't now. And to kind of have, it's a little bit of a, I think of it as antidote to FOMO, to fear of missing out. It's just that to have a sense of things really going across time and space expansively.
There's a poem I really love, Desiderata by Max Ehrmann. Quite a famous poem, so you may have heard of it, but there's a line in there that I come back to over and over again. Whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. And the reason I keep coming back to that is because I'm like, well, right, how could it not be? I mean, like, what possible force could prevent the universe from unfolding as it's meant to unfold, right? Like, I can't imagine such a force, and I'm certainly not such a force. So, if the universe is unfolding as it should, that seems to me to be true. At the same time, nobody can look very hard at this world without seeing profound injustice and things that really seem like they could be an awful lot better, right? And that seems to me to be inescapably true. And what I find really interesting is holding both of those truths, being like, okay, how do I live if it's obvious that the world holds great injustice and suffering and corruption and all of the rest, and no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should? That's the gift that keeps on giving for me. The more I reflect on that and what it makes sense to do in that context, and for me, part of the universe unfolding as it should is my desire to make things better. Like, my desire to improve things is part of the universe unfolding as it should, and yeah, I guess that's a kind of dark optimism too. Is that things are really wrong, but also somehow unfolding as they should. And again, nothing about this time stops me telling a story with my life that I'm proud to tell, and I don't see anything more to ask than that.
Thank you. I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier. You're living in a moneyless existence there, a free cafe. I think these concepts might be very foreign to, well, you walk around. I just walk around anywhere now and just kind of tap on things and get gasoline, food, um, whatever I need from my card. And it seems very important to us, right? Money and the structure it seems quite important. How do you tell me what it's like doing without? What does that even mean?
Well, a couple of clarifications. I mean, right now I'm actually visiting with my dad in England. The Happy Pig's in Ireland, and I'm right now in England at my dad's place. And the place is not entirely moneyless. My good friend Mark there lived. So when we first met, which was about 15 years ago, he was running an organic food supermarket in Bristol, and like many of us, kind of looking at everything that's wrong with the world, and he sort of came to the point of thinking, well, almost everyone I know who's doing something they don't believe in, they're doing it for money. And he was sort of thinking about this, and his friend said to him, God, if you've got such a problem with money, why don't you just give it up? And Mark, being the crazy sort of chap he is, he said, okay. So he decided to live for a year without any money, and write a book about it. And so he posted a message on FreeCycle. I don't know if you know FreeCycle. It's like a website where if you don't want something, you can just kind of post it up there, and anyone who wants it can say, "I'll get it," and they have to come and collect it, but no money changes hands. And the kind of idea that one man's rubbish is another man's treasure kind of keeps things out of landfill and gets people talking to each other and all good things. And you can also post a message on there saying, "I'm really looking for such and such." And so Mark posted a message saying, "Has anyone got something I can live in?" Thinking he might get a tent or something. And this woman said, "Actually, I've got a caravan parked outside my house that's been there for years. You'd be doing me a favour taking it away." And he found a farmer who said he could park it on his land in exchange for a bit of help at harvest time. And so he moved into this caravan. And he spent a couple of £100 setting himself up with a few bits, but then lived for a year without any money. And he had a little bit of space where he could grow some food. He did a lot of foraging, did a lot of skip diving behind supermarkets, things like this, and wrote this really beautiful book, The Moneyless Man, about the experience. And then we met because he was at the First Dark Mountain Festival talking about this book, and I was there talking about my first book, which was about the early years of the transition movement. And we became firm friends pretty much straight away. And then he started getting messages from all over the world after his book came out saying, "I want to live like this, but like, where can I do it? How do I find some land?" And so we started plotting with my kind of community activism background, in like, maybe we could create some kind of moneyless place. That went through various iterations over the years, and ended up, taking form on the west side of Ireland. Most of the money to buy the land in this case, perhaps ironically, came from the fact that his book did really well. And so he ended up having a load of money from writing a book about moneylessness. And we were like, well, what's an appropriate thing to do with this money? And so we thought, well, what makes sense maybe is to use that money to buy a piece of land, as we see it, buy it out of financial slavery, if you like. Families used to buy themselves out of slavery. And we're kind of buying this land out of the financial economy, and creating a space where people can exist without having to find money to do so. I mean, although we're destroying all their habitats, just about every other species on Earth is allowed to build itself a home and live in it. And we seem to be the only species that isn't extended that privilege. Instead, if you try and build yourself a home and live in it, you'll find all sorts of authorities pouncing on you in certainly most of the minority world, which most people call the developed world. And so, we've created a kind of inn, the Happy Pig, which is so called partly because when we got the land, there was a pigsty there, this sort of horrible corrugated iron thing that you'd never envy a pig living in. And so we used the foundations of that and built this sort of cob structure for the happy pig on top of it. But also because Socrates said once, better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Because he thought, human pleasures are so much greater and it's so much better to be a human. And we disagree with that so thoroughly that we called it the happy pig in dishonor of Socrates. And so, yeah, it's a place where people can and do just pitch up and stay. And, there's a kitchen there and compost toilets and a table tennis table and a library and a dartboard and table football and all kinds of fun things. And it's just, a place to be. So in as far as possible, what makes that possible? Like, people are like, well, who pays for everything? And we're like, well, what do you actually need to pay for? I mean, we've bought the land, so we're not paying like a mortgage on the land. We built the structure. We grow as much of the food and homebrew as much of the drink as possible. Equally, people often turn up with gifts of one kind or another. So there's quite often a lot of, conventional, if you like, food and drink around that people have brought. It's worth remembering that, we're sort of trained into this idea that in order to get anything done, you need money. But no, in order to get anything done, you need materials and labour. And one way of mobilising those is money, but it's not the only way. I mean, you can go into the wood and cut down a tree, and you can actually do the thing with your own hands without requiring money to do so. So, it's not completely moneyless. For us, it's completely moneyless for people who turn up. But in as far as possible, we live our life outside of the monetary economy, which in practice generally means through relationships. I think everyone knows if you fall on hard times financially, you end up falling back on your relationships, right? You go and stay with your brother or your parents or your friends or whatever. And we've been trained to see that as a failing, right? You're not financially independent. You're a parasite. You're a scrounger. Or actually, it's the financial economy that's the parasite. The financial economy is the thing that relies completely on the natural world and on human relationships. For it literally doesn't have any existence without those. But we've kind of been trained into seeing things completely the other way around. And we even call money the bottom line, right? Which is completely mad, actually. I mean, it goes back, there's that famous indigenous American saying about people will only understand what's going on when they realize they've poisoned every river and they can't eat money. So it's in no real sense the bottom line, other than in that we say it is and believe that it is and treat it as though it were.
I think what's remarkable...
And one other thing I'd say, actually, just to wrap that up, is that, it sounds, as you say, kind of radical to people, this idea of like, what? People can just come and stay, and how does that work? And I just want to remind us all that all that is a reversion to the ancient tradition of hospitality. I mean, for most of human history, if someone turned up on your doorstep and had nowhere to stay, you put them up for the night. And the only reason that, as far as I can see, the only reason that lapsed was because in an age of mass tourism, it's impossible. I mean, you can do that if it happens twice a year. You can't do that if 300,000 people are visiting your town every year. It's just literally impossible. In the same way as, people are like, isn't it weird how, like, in the country, you're walking along a lane, you bump into someone and you pass the time of day and you have a little conversation. And I'd never do that in the city. Isn't that strange? Well, it's not strange. It's completely reasonable. It's a very human and normal thing to do. But if you're in the middle of London and you try and do that, it's literally impossible. I mean, even if you tried to nod your head at everyone you walk past, you'd give yourself whiplash. So, all that we're doing is rekindling a very ancient way of relating to other humans. And, in some ways it's a throwback, but I believe it's also a throw forward, because I think the financial economy is dying. Well, not completely, but the financial dominant civilization and based around a belief that finance is the core of things is collapsing. And for me, the important work of today is building the sequels to that. And in many ways, that's going to be remembering wisdoms that, weren't really applicable in an age of mass finance and mass tourism. And so I don't just see kind of hospitality as a throwback. I see it also as a throw forward to the kind of future we want to be living in.
I have so many objections in my mind to how could this possibly work.
Great.
That and I'm sure you've heard them all, so I don't want to kind of be obvious about them. But I think how I would sum up my question to you is this. I have moments, and I try to have more of them, where I kind of open up my home, or I kind of get on the phone with someone emails me and said, "Oh, I'd like to visit," and I get on the phone with them, and if they seem nice, I can be pretty open. Yeah, come, stay. Yeah, you can help out. And I live on a farm in Vermont, just for context. I don't think I had mentioned that. So it's very easy for me to relate that way, I think, to people and say, yeah, come on up, give us a hand with something. There's always a place to sleep. And then there's a fear right behind that of, oh my gosh, they're going to take advantage of me. I'm leading with this, and that works out some of the time, but there's always someone that's kind of looking for that, and I'm not going to notice it until it's too late, and I'm going to be caught with my pants down. And so the whole thing just gets shut down so quickly, I think, for a lot of us in a lot of situations, that this is just so unsafe, we can't go there. And so I don't know what the question is exactly, but
yeah, I mean, how
do you deal with kind of the freeloaders or the fear of freeloaders, or having boundaries having healthy boundaries when you're trying to explore this sequel, as you said?
Sequels, yeah, plural, important. There's no one answer, I don't think, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of places I could go with that question. I mean, what I'm moved to start with is, I feel like there's this fundamental longing in many of us, if not all of us, for some kind of higher authority to appeal to. And I don't necessarily mean a god, but, a police force or a government or a rule book or a law that says, I'm safe. And like, if I don't feel safe, then I can appeal to this, bank account. And in response to that, we've created all these things, governments, police, gods, all these higher forces to appeal to. And I would argue that actually we're just here together, and we need to learn how to create safety for each other, and see the best in each other and expect the best in each other. And the more that we do that, the more that we create that future, and the less that we do that, the less that we create that future. And I would say that over the last few hundred years, we've done an extraordinarily bad job of creating that future. We've built a whole culture built around mutual suspicion and exploitation and dog eat dog and colonialism and the opposite of everything that might make this place somewhere where we could actually trust someone that we meet. And in my experience, I mean, when I first met David Fleming, the first time he invited me to his home, and I went there and we talked for a day about all manner of things. And as I left, he gave me a key to his house and said, come back anytime. And by God, that moved me. To feel so trusted so quickly, that awoke in me this deep desire and commitment to not let him down on that, to prove myself worthy of that trust. And yeah, I've never forgotten that gesture of trust, and I've tried wherever possible to extend that similarly to others, because if it had that effect on me, I'm sure it's going to have a similar effect on other people. And I do think that, for sure, there are plenty of people out there who are exploitative and, will give them an inch and they'll take a mile and all of that. And God knows we've created a culture to encourage that in people. And most especially in America, which I think has lost its way probably more than any other culture on earth. But to me, clearly, the response to that is, okay, how do I start building the world I want to live in? Not how do I fit most easily into this one that I despise. And so yeah, I see the work of today in many ways as acting contrary to the dominant culture because I hate it. It's killing everything on earth, and it makes everybody I know miserable, and it causes depression and suicide, and I want no part in it. So what I want to do is live my life building things that make other people go, oh my God, yes! Not like, oh yeah, well, you seem to have made a safe space for yourself. Well done, mate. And so yeah, that's what we try. And it can be overwhelming. Like, let's make no bones about it, because we're trying to do something deeply countercultural. And if we lived, I don't know, in Ireland 500 years ago, then I think a lot of the things we're doing would be really normal. And consequently, they'd be a lot easier. Because you wouldn't be overwhelmed potentially by the numbers of people who are coming, and you wouldn't be dealing with a culture in which it's seen as normal to just take people for everything that they've got. So I think those are very, very rational fears, but I don't think they're very helpful ones. They might warn us where we need to be careful. And so there are practical things that we do. So, for example, lots of people turn up. Funnily enough, what's sometimes the more tiring thing, especially for Mark, because he's written a few books about moneylessness, and also one most recently called The Way Home: Tales from a Life Without Technology, because he now has given up electricity. So he doesn't just live off grid, he's given up electricity altogether. And so quite often people turn up and they're really interested to talk with Mark. And it's sort of fine, actually, if there are loads of people there. What's more tricky sometimes is if there's just one person staying in the pig, because then it can feel a bit like you feel a bit bad leaving them there on their own, and so you feel like you sort of have a bit of a social obligation to go and hang out, even if actually you've got some other stuff you really need to be getting on with. But I think what's really important to notice is not that we live in some, utopian paradise with no problems, because hopefully that isn't the case. But rather that the kinds of problems that we have are ones like that. They're relational problems, they're social problems, they're problems of, getting on with each other and growing food, and they're not monetary problems. And we're so used to turning every problem in the world into a monetary problem. Like,
well, maybe every
like there's a war in Ukraine at the moment,
yeah. And maybe every problem is a relationship problem, and we think we can solve them with money or with guns or something, and we're very surprised when we can't.
Exactly. Yeah. And we have an amazing ability to take anything and turn it into a monetary problem. Like, there's a war in Ukraine, and we're told that the problem this causes is world food prices or, market crashes. And it's like, that's really odd, actually, when you think about it. Like, there are human beings being killed here, and killing. And so because we're so good at doing that, then our experience of things like what I see as an unfolding societal collapse appear to us like financial problems. Like, oh gosh, my heating bills have gone up like they have massively in this country over the last few months. Or, I can't afford to buy the food I used to be able to afford to buy in the supermarket, whatever. So, the society's so adept at turning these into financial problems that our experience of them is financial problems on the whole, until ultimately, as I say, we eventually come to a point where either we simply can't afford to participate in the financial system anymore, we lose our job or whatever it may be, or, as has also happened in many countries around the world, the financial system collapses. Our currency devalues and loses all meaning in that way. And then again, we see like what a lie it is, this idea that we should base our very human desire for future security on our bank account or our pension. That's where we're told to look for security, but actually it's profoundly insecure. And that's why, David's books are so interesting, because as a kind of cultural historian, he looks back and he was like, well, okay, economic growth can't continue forever, so it is going to end. So how did humans and indeed other species support themselves for the many millennia before economic growth? And the answer, in short, is culture and community and the natural world. And the financial economy as we know it has only existed a couple of hundred years, and it's already destroying the roots of life on Earth. So it seems a pretty unwise place to place our faith when you look at it in those terms.
I think it's always, with regards to this moneyless lifestyle, or making some of the choices you've made or Mark's made to live in a way that's more congruent with how we might survive the future.
Yeah, I want to kind of have my kind of core influence in the world in other ways. And I'm really interested in the origin of this word sacrifice, because I think we have quite a messed up relationship with that often in the kind of environmental movement in the broadest sense of the word. And I think it's really useful to notice that the origins of that word are to make something sacred. Like vice is like artifice, it's like making something and sacred. And for me, I mean, like giving up flying, for example, which I did 20 years ago, like for me that was only a sacrifice in that sense of the word, in that at the time, the thing I'd most love to see in the world probably is the Great Redwoods in California. And my then girlfriend was from San Luis Obispo in California and really wanted me to come out and meet her family. And around that time, I'd learned about the climate crisis and was like, yeah, I don't feel super comfortable with that. And reflecting on that made me realize that giving up flying, as they say, it wasn't primarily about, oh no, I'm going to lose this experience of meeting these great redwoods, because actually it felt really uncomfortable to me, the idea of flying out there and in so doing likely contributing to their demise. But rather that doing that would have made me unhappy. It would have created this cognitive dissonance in me, this sense of like, actually, I'm really not proud of the story I'm telling with my life in this particular case. And so actually what I was choosing to do was to be happier. And as soon as I framed it that way, it made it pretty easy. So it wasn't about giving up something I really wanted. It was about making a sacred choice, making a choice that actually helped me feel more integrated and whole and happy. And similarly, in this case, choosing not to have children, there were things about that I think I'd really love. But actually, on deep reflection, it felt to me like in the true sense, a sacrifice, a choice to do something that felt truly congruent for me. But of course, if you've already got kids, that's not an option. And I would say that if you're that middle-aged guy with 2 kids and a mortgage, the question is, how can I meet more of my needs relationally rather than financially? Not all of them, but more of them. So, it might be a huge thing, like, for example...
Let me just pick up one.
Yeah, and it could be small, it could be huge. It could be a huge thing, like... So I don't know the equivalent over there, but we have a website called Diggers and Dreamers, which is a kind of directory of intentional communities of various kinds, from kind of tiny ones to really large ones. And they have kind of notice boards of like communities that are looking for members. And so, that guy could, for example, think, well, my biggest financial expenditure is my mortgage. So is there a way that I could meet that need relationally instead of financially? And it could be that actually living in a community setting, I know a lot of people for whom this is a lived reality, that actually doing that hugely reduced their financial outgoings because they no longer had a mortgage and were paying into the communal pot instead. Created a real sense of community around themselves, because day to day, instead of going out and earning a wage to pay their mortgage, they were cutting wood or growing food or looking after the kids of other families or whatever it is in that community. And yeah, again, like there are relational demands on you that aren't there when you're just paying a mortgage and living in your white box, but there are financial demands that disappear. And the thing about that is that that relational existence in community, hypothetically, growing your own food, cutting your own wood, whatever it is, those things don't go away when the financial markets collapse. Like when your bank is struggling and suddenly forecloses on that house, that isn't a thing that happens to that community. That's a thing that happens when you're dependent on the financial system. So it could be a huge thing like that. It could be a small thing, like I talked about Free Cycle. It could be like, well, God, we really need a new sofa because the kids have just destroyed it. God, that's going to cost, I don't know, $500. I may well be revealing that I have no idea how much a sofa costs these days.
Say, yeah.
Instead, you could post a message on Free Cycle and say, hey, I'm looking for a sofa, and someone may well just give you one. And it may be, a different color from your ideal or whatever. But again, you can decide, like, would I rather give the time to earning the money to have it the color I want, or would I rather have the freedom and a different colored sofa? And so, that's Mark. Actually, after The Moneyless Man, he wrote another book, which I edited, called The Moneyless Manifesto. And that's a kind of how-to guide. It's like how to meet your needs in all these different areas without money, whether that's household possessions, whether that's going on holiday, whether that's a place to live, whether that's food. So yeah, I'd say, get a copy of that book, or I could recommend a couple of others, and start learning what it feels like to live in ways that aren't dependent on money. And in my experience, what that feels like is a growing sense of freedom, a growing sense of joy. And I don't think you could give any greater gift to your kids than seeing their dad living with a greater sense of freedom and joy, and possibly giving them a taste of the kind of future that we'd all rather live in than the depressing, miserable, soul-destroying, mainstream corporate jobs that sadly most people are still in.
Wow. Thanks, Shaun. That's, I think, a good roadmap and some good resources. I'm going to have to wrap up the conversation here. I have a previous commitment. There's so many questions I have for you to follow up on, and maybe some observations to reflect. So I'd love to pick up another time, but I want to just thank you for your time today. And just lastly, ask if there's anything you want to mention to listeners as we wrap up.
Well, thanks, Tristan. Yeah, it's been a joy, and I'd be more than happy to speak again. So let me know when. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess I would just what comes to mind now is one of my favorite lines from Howard Thurman, who was one of Martin Luther King's mentors, and he said, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and go do that, because the world needs people who've come alive." And that's been a really great touchstone for me in my grieving and in my wider lifestyle choices. Like, choose to be fully alive would be my commendation, whatever that looks like for you. Live a wholehearted life. And if people are interested in my work, I'm at darkoptimism.org, and there's links to just about everything I've mentioned there. And also I'd mention, in keeping with all that I'm saying, I've talked about David's life work, Lean Logic, a dictionary for the future and how to survive it. And thanks to the work of a fan, that's now freely available as well. So if people want to explore that in free and in full, then leanlogic.online will give you free access to the most astonishing book I've ever read. Obviously, if people want to, the hard copy is a thing of beauty. So if people want to get one of those, they'll have to pay some money. But all the content is online at leanlogic.online. So yeah, enjoy it as much as I do, hopefully.
That's amazing. I can attest. I picked up my hard copy, and it's a beautiful book that I've started to sample. Well, thank you, Shaun. I think we'll wrap up there and talk again.